Good evening, and welcome to Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. On this 16th episode, we're going to be talking about corona nightmares and quarantine nightmares that are associated with the lockdowns. It'll be a bit of a shorter presentation, but I think I'll do lots of interesting rambling, I hope. And I also, as I've pinned in the chat, I've put a poll out for Corona nightmares, so it'll make a little more sense maybe after the presentation if it's unclear at all, but by the end of the show, I'll review the results of that, and that should be interesting. So without further ado, let's see what we have. Right, so COVID-19 or quarantine nightmares. I thought it would be good to start off with sort of a bit of a recap of what this is, just in case. I know everyone watching this live knows, but maybe in 50 years when Generation Omega is watching this video and it gets picked up by the algorithm randomly. COVID-19 means coronavirus disease 2019, which is the year that it was discovered. Just in case you're watching this in the future, and hopefully it's gone in the future. But this is an electron microscopy image of it. These more round circular ones sort of budding off from the cell there. So yeah, that's a transmission electron microscopy image from the first US patient. But basically what happened was there was a virus first identified in Wuhan, China, spread over the whole world pretty much, and by March 2020 everything was in lockdown, pretty much every country. And what lockdown means is quarantine, so essential businesses were closed, non-essential businesses I mean. We weren't supposed to leave our homes, and unless it was absolutely necessary. In Ontario, where I live, this first lockdown lasted 3 months in what was called the first wave, which was the first instance of people getting it en masse. We're now in the second wave, and this is almost a year later, 10 months later, January 2021, and as far as we know, we're in lockdown again for a month. So, big, impactful situation, and as you might expect, people are under a lot of stress. I forgot to check to make sure you can see the presentation. Yes, you can. Excellent. Yeah, so people are under a lot of stress, and as we know from some of the previous reading we've done, a lot of stress means a lot of nightmares. So people all over the world since the pandemic have started reporting having dreams related to some aspect of the virus, social distancing, online meetings in some cases, and they have reported them as being particularly vivid. I've had a couple of these myself back in April, so I can attest to this. And although they weren't directly related to COVID, I kind of made a judgment call that they were. You'll notice that some people have nightmares that are directly related to the virus, or related to quarantine, or related to the social changes that sort of took over the culture as a result of trying to get less people sick. And then other people will just have an increase in nightmares in general, but the nightmares aren't necessarily related to coronavirus, or it's not obvious how they might be. Excuse me. So, yeah, as we know, nightmares are caused by worry in our conscious or unconscious mind, so it makes sense that just any sort of calamity or global offense might provoke increased nightmares. And we know, right, I mentioned that. There are many people who have also previously claimed never to have been able to remember their dreams or nightmares, but since the whole corona thing started, they were able to, in many cases. And a recent dream survey by Deirdre Lee Barrett, an assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, seems to confirm that the incidence of vivid dreams has increased as the virus has spread around the world. This is not unprecedented. Studies have shown that events like 9/11 changed the way people dreamed for a time, making the dreams more intense and memorable in the days after the attacks. It seems feasible that the coronavirus pandemic, which has personally impacted almost everyone on Earth, would obviously have a similar impact. So I wanted to go over sort of the main three forms of direct dreaming about the virus or nightmares about the virus. And these three all appear on the poll that I linked. But these include contracting the illness yourself or a loved one contracting the illness. And dreams that are along this line could be something like bugs flying at you, which are representative of the disease. It could be people coughing on you, or you're in some high-risk situation for contracting the virus. This could be a dream about just piles of dead bodies or mass graves, things like that. A friend of the show, Michelle, was kind enough to send in a nightmare like this that I'd like to share. She also sent another one that I'll read at the end because it isn't related to corona, but this is a good example of a worry about contracting the illness nightmare. So the COVID-related dream that I remember was about high school. We were having a party of some kind, like a reunion, with all the people that had left the high school around the same time as me. They were all still rather young. There was an awkward bit in it where an old boyfriend from primary school, yeah, I know we were just kids back then, but I was seriously in love with him and it never really went away, and my current boyfriend, whom I met in university, both were at this party. There was this part where I kind of tried to balance the love I once felt for my ex and the love I now feel for my current boyfriend, which was kind of complicated. Before I could really figure it out, though, the COVID part started. We were standing in the garden, the school garden. It was an awesome garden. It was enclosed by the school on 4 sides, together with this large crowd of people, like everyone invited to the reunion was standing in the garden at this point. Suddenly, they started partying. I like how that's phrased. Like, very enthusiastically. I got just belly shots, I'm assuming that means. I got swept up by the crowd and got stuck between all these people. I wanted to get out because I was so worried about COVID, and we were not surprised to be doing this at all. We were not supposed to be doing this at all, sorry. This theme kind of came back in other dreams as well, in very similar ways. When I would watch shows, I now get uncomfortable when seeing people in big crowds or hugging and stuff. The dream pretty much ended after that. Yeah, I have a similar thing when you see people just like on the news, like partying as though nothing's happening. It makes me feel cringe, actually. Like I feel like there's stuff in the air there that I don't want to see. So another form of nightmares that's been common is these new social rule faux pas nightmares, is what I would call it. So seeing as all these changes have been made, a lot of business has moved online, and also the social distancing rules. So I saw a number of examples of these. I don't have any specific one, but they included things like a woman who kept having repeated false awakenings, where she was hopping into the wrong Zoom calls over and over again and just suffering the embarrassment of that. They can be nightmares about conflict with your partner, as in households where couples were quarantined together. This often put a lot of pressure on people's relationships in many cases. These can also be nightmares about dating while trying to stay 6 feet apart, which is another common one that I read about. Or nightmares where trading toilet paper was the new currency, as in the first wave, if you recall, there was a toilet paper shortage, as people thought it was, I guess, the end of the world or something, and that they would need to just stockpile as much toilet paper as possible. But the one that I've had the most of, I think I've only really had 2 nightmares that I could call corona nightmares, but they're more related to quarantine and isolation. So I actually did some reading about isolation and loneliness, which is pretty interesting. Isolation takes a pretty serious toll on the mind. It can make our brains and bodies crave social interaction like we do food, and it can result in unusually vivid dreams, which is regardless of like the quarantine aspect of it. Like, this was known before case. You have more vivid dreams in isolation, period, unrelated to corona. Isolation can cause depression, poor sleep quality, impaired executive function, accelerated cognitive decline, risk of Alzheimer's as well, poor cardiovascular function, and impaired immunity at every stage of life. It's actually dangerous. You often hear of solitary confinement driving people to madness because there's an utter lack of stimuli. Now, obviously, home quarantine isn't as bad as solitary confinement, but again, the lack of socialization is not something that we're evolved for. Your circadian rhythms can also get messed up if you let them in quarantine, because you're not really interacting with the world outside or the daylight. And this is something that is within your control if you have a bit of discipline. I, unfortunately, in April didn't have this discipline, and in the first lockdown, I was pretty much on night shift for no reason, and that definitely probably contributed to some of my isolation quarantine nightmares. Even before the pandemic, according to a 2018 national survey by Cigna, loneliness levels had reached an all-time high, with nearly half of 20,000 US adults reporting that they sometimes or always feel alone. 40% of survey participants also reported that sometimes or always they feel that their relationships are not meaningful and that they feel isolated. So it's not even necessarily related to your relationship status or who might be in your household. It's just the perception of the quality and value of your relationships and the feeling of connection to others that determines whether or not you're lonely. But that's going off on a bit of a tangent. And I was having this thought as well, to continue a different tangent, but I was almost thinking like war would have been perhaps a better crisis in terms of the effect on the mind. Obviously, if you're in the war, there's like PTSD and things like that. But I mean, if for some reason you weren't there, but you were still aware that there was a war happening, in a sense, like it drives people together, towards like a sense of unity and interaction with each other. Like it's forced socialization almost. Like even if you are drafted, like you have a sense of camaraderie. So it's probably in some ways less hard on the mind. I wouldn't make the argument that it's, war is preferable to what we have here, but loneliness is also a risk factor for premature mortality, as I mentioned, and the social isolation has been shown to almost double that risk. The magnitude of the isolation, so how isolated you are, is a spectrum, of course, but there's increased risk, similar in magnitude to the extent to which obesity and smoking affect early death. So like the more you smoke and the more obese you are, the more likely you are to die. Same thing is true of isolation. The more and more isolated you are, the more likely you are to die prematurely. So basically, just as a point of health, try to get involved as much as you can online or safely in other ways right now. And for sure, once this quarantine's over, if you lived a quarantine lifestyle, try to get out there and get involved in stuff to get over your social anxiety. And now I wanted to recount probably my most vivid quarantine isolation, or it was more of a being trapped nightmare, so I'd have to call it a quarantine one. But essentially when I first got laid off, I guess I'm a PhD student, so it's not really laid off, but I was asked to stay home like mid-March, and then as I mentioned, I was pretty much home for 6 weeks straight. Like I didn't leave the house, just like had things delivered, like that type of thing. And I had like some pretty bad dreams in that time, but I had one in particular. I told it in the first episode, but I'm going to tell it again. I was walking home from soccer practice in my hometown, and it was like east in the town, and I lived in the west, and I didn't know the area very well. And I was approaching a subdivision that I didn't recognize. It was unfamiliar to me, but I have a pretty good sense of direction. Like I know that I'm walking west, and I thought, hey, this will be a good shortcut. Like why don't I just slip through here? So I start walking into the subdivision, and there is a fellow jogging by, a woman walking her dog, and I remember just feeling a sense of unease in the air. And I don't know if anyone else has this, but sometimes at night when I'm walking, I'll try to deliberately appear to be non-threatening. Maybe that's like a pretty beta tendency that I have, but whatever. I'm just sharing. Anyway, so yeah, like I remember kind of like walking ahead of the lady, like a lot before I crossed the street in front of her, that type of thing. And then there was a guy that I didn't see who passed right by me, and then he turned around and he like ran past me again and was just walking very quickly up the street. And I came to an intersection, and it was a T-shaped intersection. I was on the lower end of it, and I was walking up, and I had the choice to go right or straight. Both directions led to catwalks, and the guy who was running went straight, and I was like, you know what, let's just go right. Like, I don't want to deal, like, he's behaving oddly. I just want to kind of try something else, and both of these directions are, you know, roughly the way that I need to be going. So I walked down this street to the right, and I walked down the catwalk, and as soon as I entered the catwalk, it became enclosed over, like it became a tunnel. It wasn't a tunnel when I entered it, but it became that way, and it was made of concrete. And I was going down this winding staircase that seemed to last unusually long, and I finally ended up coming out into this gray, dimly lit schoolyard, or I thought it was a schoolyard. It looked like a playground, but there wasn't really any equipment or anything. And the entire yard, the entire lot, was just fenced off with these like 10, 20 foot high fences with barbed wire on top. And it was that type of, I don't know if you've ever seen, just like a field at night when you've got a bright light, but then as the light just shines into the darkness, it just gets swallowed by, I mean, there shouldn't be anything there. There's nothing there. I guess it's just particles in the air maybe that just kind of kill the light after a while. But like, I just had that sense of like the vastness of the night around me and just being in that lonely field. And I looked behind me, and there were these like pipes that were also fenced off, and it looked almost like some sort of industrial yard all of a sudden. Didn't look like a schoolyard at all. But the catwalk also was blocked off by a fence, so I was like, okay, this is not the way to go. So I went back in to what now appeared to be an industrial building, but it was the start of the catwalk I had come out of. The catwalk that was blocked off was the one that I wanted to continue through to the street. Anyway, I walked back up through that catwalk, that strange building / catwalk, and then I went back up to that T-shaped intersection, and I couldn't find the other catwalk in the straight direction, so I took a left into a house. And I don't know why I thought that was appropriate, but it made sense in the dream. I walked into someone's house because, I think it was because my Google Maps was telling me that this is the way to the catwalk. And I like climbed up a floor, and it was just kind of a hall with like a few doors, 2 doors, one on my left behind me, one on my left in front of me, and then a door like straight ahead and a door to the right in front of me. And I kind of like walk up to this intersection of the 3 doors, and I hear a toilet flush, and then a guy steps out of the door to my left, and it's the guy who had run ahead of me. And I just felt really like socially awkward in that moment, and I asked like, how do I get out of here? Like, how do I get to the street? And he was actually pretty cool about it. He was like, oh yeah, just go out that door to the right there. And I opened the door, and it's this unfinished basement with these wooden steps that don't have backs to them, just those like boards essentially, those kind of sketchy staircases, garden hose for a handle, that type of thing. And so I was walking down there. I really didn't trust the situation at all. And it looked like someone's house, like a laundry room. There was like piles of laundry, like they hadn't tidied up. And then he was like, oh yeah, he was still at the top of the stairs. I looked back, and he's like, yeah, just go through that door there. And it's this door that was just very ugly and thin, and it didn't have a handle. So I knew that like if it was like set to lock or whatever, I had no way of like reopening it from the other side. And it led to another room that was just like a very small kind of room with concrete walls. And I was like, dude, are you gonna murder me if I go in here? And he's like, no, you're good. And I was just like, okay, well, I have to get out of here. Like, I have no choice. And I just kind of went for it. And sure enough, it led to the street. And then as I was walking past the far side of the catwalk that was blocked off from that industrial yard, I saw him standing in the industrial yard looking back out at me. And that was the end of the dream. But if I were to analyze that from, a COVID perspective, I would definitely say it's about quarantine and maybe the feeling of being unsure of the future, right? That's, common in those types of situations. So, I mean, that guy could have maybe represented the government, if you will, because he's telling me to like enter this more confined space and that it will lead to somewhere better. But then I don't know why he was watching me at the end in a creepy way. Maybe it could just be, again, lack of trust of the government if I were to, interpret my own dream. But you can never do that with 100% accuracy, of course. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. I think that is one of my most memorable nightmares, certainly in the last 5 years. So yeah, there it is. So again, if you have your own COVID nightmare, feel free to share it in the chat. That's what tonight is all about, and I'll read them all. Or if it's a longer one, you can also send it to my email, which is also going to be posted above my head on the left side of the screen. I'll read them all by the end of the stream. So that should be good. And we'll check the chat, and then afterwards we'll see if there is any nightmares on Reddit or anything else. So hi, there's going to be a million too many movies and artworks by then, just like Nam. Oh yeah, like movies and artworks about COVID. I would imagine so, yeah. War is generally better because you don't go. Massively bad if you have sons and perhaps even today daughters. Yeah. I mean, if you don't go though, you're kind of like shamed. I mean, I don't know. Again, I can't really imagine what sort of other horrors would await in that situation, so I really can't judge. But I would imagine it's easier in terms of the loneliness aspect, which is probably not saying much. I have not had a corona nightmare per se, but the spring lockdown took place concurrently with window replacement in my condo. I might wait on that because I have a feeling that there's going to be more to that message. Maybe I'm wrong though. Okay, I'm going to read some nightmares from Reddit, and well, I'll check my email too. Okay, nothing new, but yeah, I'll read some nightmares from Reddit in the meantime. Keep filling out that poll. This is a post by a user named SciACC. The post is titled, "Nightmare that paralyzed me for 5 minutes when it woke me up." The post reads, "I couldn't remember the entire thing, and I just woke up half an hour ago, but the last few moments went like this. A woman, around her mid-60s, was about to give me some take-home food after a celebration or something. This was inside a house, gray walls. The lights weren't exactly dim, but I knew they weren't installed correctly. I could notice a still life painting and wooden furniture, like we were in a dining room. The food that she was about to give me was inside a Tupperware, in which she held with two hands in a fragile manner. Suddenly, a cat jumped from the dining table and the food spilt all over. The woman got so infuriated, her eyes widened, raising her hand like she was about to hit or throw something at the cat. Then she started to freeze and salivate. She took a few steps back. I could hear cracking from her body every time she moved. Not like bones cracking, more like a huge rock about to shatter or a tree falling down. Her left eye began changing color and texture, from natural to jaundice yellow, and the texture was as if it was a bronze sculpture left to age. Her pupil looked as if it were sunk down a few inches. She started going pale, and her left eye started to bleed excessively, like she was tearing up blood without control. She took a few more steps back and collapsed. That all happened in just a few seconds in my dream. When I woke up, I couldn't move at all. I could feel my heart beating so fast for a few minutes until I calmed down and began moving. Thanks for reading my nightmare." That's interesting. So, I mean, the end of it is certainly sleep paralysis. Now, from everything I've read, I haven't seen anything that suggests that a nightmare or the specific contents of a nightmare should be able to trigger sleep paralysis. But I would have to look into that. I didn't think that was a thing, though. In terms of interpretation, that is a tough one. Did you not trust the food? Didn't seem like it. She becomes angry at the cat. Her eye turns yellow and bleeds. And then she dies. That is a tough dream to analyze, I'm not gonna lie. I have no idea what that could be about. If we look at our handy interpretation chart, I don't think that's going to help us much. Like, blood could mean life change, but that's like obviously the most broad thing ever coming out of the eye. Injuries, feeling weak or vulnerable. But again, it's not you having it, it's somebody else. Paralysis or being unable to move. You feel stuck in some real life situation. There's something about yourself that you're suppressing. I mean, that would be true if it were part of the dream, but the paralysis seems to be real in this case. Whoops. You know. I have not had a corona nightmares per se, but the spring lockdown took place concurrently with my window replacement in my condo. So we were under hazmat covers on the windows and subject to workers coming through constantly, and noise so loud we couldn't talk or listen to music for about 2 months during work hours. So I had a nightmare about people coming through, and I think this was because the tension from COVID made people coming through even worse than it already was. There was always tension with workers who resisted putting on masks and sanitizing and wearing booties over their shoes. It was a living nightmare. Interesting. I feel like you could probably count that as a what's it called? A nightmare about contracting the virus. I feel like I would count it in that category because it's about being put in a situation consistently where there's individuals who are putting you at risk. For this nightmare for Psi ACC, I don't know if I'm going to be able to interpret this. Like, I would need to know more background. Like, it could be a being trapped nightmare, because maybe you just feel awkward about being stuck there at this dinner with this person whose company you're not enjoying, and there's a cat that's running wild all over the place, and then she just dies in front of you, and you're just like, oh man. But yeah, again, I don't know how I could connect it to the sleep paralysis. I'm sorry. That's the best I can do. This is a post by a user named OKZookeeperGame6856. The post is titled, "Did anyone else have this as a kid?" The post reads, "Back when I was a child, I kept having these strange dreams or nightmares, and I'll try now to describe them. It was all very vague. There were no monsters, but I remember it scared me nonetheless. I was in a room or big area, floating or walking or just, I don't know, being there. I remember the feeling of being so insignificant. There were these big spheres, and they kept getting bigger and bigger. It was so terrorizing, and I don't even know why. Sorry for the stupid explanation, but I can't even explain it better. Does anyone recall having anything like this as a kid? If not, I'll delete this post, but if someone does and can explain it better, I'd like to hear it." Well, I've personally never had one about shapes that are expanding to unreasonable sizes, but the vibe of it actually kind of reminds me of a dream that I had. I'm seeing also that in the comments of this Reddit post, there are people who say that apparently nightmares about different shapes expanding and contracting are not uncommon. And they're called like geometric night terrors. They're just, things where shapes are upsetting to you for whatever reason. But the nightmare I had when I was a kid, it was similar, but it was like, it was similar in the vibe, not in the content. So I was walking through this dark hallway, and there were 3 doors, and they each had like peepholes and I was looking through each one of the peepholes, and all I could really see was just like a very vast, empty room. And at the end of the room was a light, and the lights were different colors. And I don't remember the colors in the first two doors, but I chose the last door, and it had a light that was blue, and the light just kind of pulsed. Like every now and then it would pulse. But it never went fully off. It would just kind of brighten and then dim, and then brighten and dim. And I went into the room, and I kind of walked up to it, and it's just like the dead silence. And there was a room next to that pulsing light, and it was just on the right at the back wall. And I opened that door, and I went in, and it was this small platform, and inside that room it was just like a massive canyon, but it was still walls, like it was still a man-made building. But from the ceiling, from chains, were just these bags of bodies hung by their necks in chains, and there were just like thousands of them, like a forest of hanging bodies just in the darkness, in the silence, and then this pulsing blue light for some reason, like outside the door. And that was that was another unsettling nightmare I had, but that wasn't related to Corona or anything. But I get the same vibe for some reason when I read about this dream with the big spheres. Again, difficult to interpret one like that. I know for a fact that my dream chart has nothing like that on it. Let's check the chat. Most too old to be sent off. I have not had many COVID nightmares to speak of. I've had one where my son, who sings, survives it, but with lungs turned to pulp, never to sing again. And another where my son, who works in a hospital, gets stuck in a COVID ward with no protection, and sick people coughing all over him, and he's afraid. Oh, well, those are horrible. Yeah, those sound horrible. They are, but oddly, none about myself, or perhaps because I have a measure of control over my own exposure, and in any case, I'm more concerned about them. They'll be fine, of course. Yeah, worse when you can't control it. Alright, so I would definitely say that counts as two different counts of a contracting the coronavirus nightmare. Also very disturbing dreams, your lungs turn to pulp and whatnot. Jeez. Wow. Let's get into another one from Reddit. This is a post by a user named AOS Chaos. The post is titled Hill's Grin. The post reads, Backstory. I am currently nearing the age of 27. For 24 years, I have had a nightmare disorder. With the help of some calculations, I could very well have had over 10,000 nightmares. Wow. A lot of them are burned into my memory in thorough detail, and so I thought I would share the very first one I've ever had or could remember. I was 3 years old at the time, a happy child in a happy family. The dream. Wood crackles in the fireplace. I am sitting on the cozy rug in my lounge on a summer's eve. It feels like the dark is oppressive and forcing the light to remain dim despite the size of the fire. In front of me was a fondue spread, and my mother was preparing it. It was around Christmas time, and the tree was already up. Put the decorations on the tree, my mother commanded in a cheery voice. I excitedly opened the box of ornaments at the foot of the tree. It was a bunch of dragons and wyverns. I felt uneasy and scared. This was out of character for my mom, because she had believed the creatures to be evil at the time. I started crying when I looked back at her face. It was contorted in the most hateful expression I have ever seen it in. It was as if she wanted to kill me, and I didn't understand why. Warily, I asked through my tears, "Are you okay, Mommy?" The room was dead silent. There was no warmth from the fire, and it barely lit the room anymore. There stood a shadow behind my mother with no face or distinguishable features. He was darker than the rest of the room. He bent down and passed into my mom. She seemed to zone out. She lifted her arms slowly, as if she were a marionette. I scooted closer, still scared of her, but worried about her. Suddenly, her arm flew down and slapped me right across the face. Hard. It stung. My ears were ringing, and my neck felt like it was broken. I slowly fell onto my side, unable to move. I stared up at her. Her face had changed. Her usually bright green eyes were open so wide that the lids were pulling away from the eyeballs, and her mouth was a Cheshire cat-style grin from ear to ear. It was malicious, evil. I felt myself fade, and I knew one thing. I'm dying. As I closed my eyes, there was a deep, guttural laugh and the sound of something ripping. Holy. I mean, I gotta give a round of applause to AOS Chaos for that very, very well-written nightmare. I'm glad they're able to communicate them so effectively after having 10,000 of them. And this is definitely one that I can interpret from the chart. So there's 3 themes that I noticed here. One is a dark figure, one is it's an imposter nightmare, and one is paralysis or being unable to move at the end after receiving the slap. So we can go through those in order. So a dark figure indicates doubt or uncertainty about your future or experiencing a significant change in your life. The figure can be human or not. In this case, it seems humanoid. So that's doubt and uncertainty. So let's remember that. Next, paralysis and being unable to move. You feel stuck in some situation in real life, or there's something about yourself that you think that you're suppressing. Okay, so that kind of ties in a bit to the doubt and uncertainty about your future. And then next is an imposter. So your mother, I would definitely say, is an imposter in this nightmare, and that can indicate that you suspect that a person in real life is untrustworthy or not who they appear to be. It can also be a warning to protect yourself, your information, or your psychological space. So I'm not sure, I have to check again if they had this in childhood. 3 years old, wow. 3 years old when you had that nightmare. That's incredible that you remember it in such detail. Like almost borderline unbelievable, I'm not going to lie. Maybe you're such a good writer that probably just after the fact you enhanced it a bit. But yeah, so I almost wonder if it's a feeling of, disconnect from your own mother. Maybe because you're feeling uncertain about the future and you're feeling stuck in a situation, or that there's something about yourself you're suppressing. Maybe you think that if you yell at your mother or act out or something, that she'll stop loving you, something of that nature. Or maybe you do remember even in earlier childhood an instance where your mother was not, there are times, of course, like for a parent when it can be stressful and maybe she behaved in a way towards you where you felt like she didn't love you or something like that. And you had this fear that maybe she isn't who she said she was. I don't know anything about your home life and your family life, but I do know a bit about dissociating and these types of things in people who have borderline personality disorder, where they believe that there's an evil version and a kind version of their mother based on the demands that their mother puts upon them at an early age. And obviously that would indicate a more serious trauma than I would want to get into, or that I can even read from or indicate from this nightmare. But it's an interesting possibility, and it's really interesting that you remember it in such detail at that age. Anything new in the chat? Nope. Well, anyway, great nightmare there by AOS Chaos. Oops. This is a post by a user named Poppy Thoughty. The post is titled "Stabbed Awake." The post reads, I've always had fairly vivid dreams and can remember chunks of dreams if I write them down or think about them after waking up. But this dream has really stuck with me like no other. For some background, I lived with my friend Rachel. Our apartment was laid out. When you walked in the front door, there was a short hallway where you would walk straight and then enter the living room, or you could walk right through our galley kitchen, which led to the dining room. And the dining room was open to the living room. I'm not going to understand that. We had a mirror on the wall in the short hallway, so depending on where you were sitting on the couch in the living room, you could see the mirror and see into the kitchen a bit. I often took naps on the couch, which was where I was sleeping for this particular dream. Here we go. So in my dream, Rachel and I were hanging out on the couch watching TV. I was sitting in the spot where I could see the mirror and see into the kitchen. Excuse me. I looked away from the TV to the mirror, and I saw that there was a woman staring into the mirror. She didn't look all that creepy, just a woman, probably in her 30s, with long black hair. I looked at Rachel and told her to run and hide because someone was in the apartment, and I planned to take care of it. Rachel ran off, and the woman turned around, walked through our kitchen, and came into the living room from the dining room. She walked right up to me, where I was now standing in front of the couch. She had our kitchen scissors in her hand, holding the blades in her fist. I quickly grabbed the scissors out of her hand, and she grinned. I looked back at her. I looked back at her hand. A new pair of scissors were appearing in her hand. I looked up at her face in shock, and she stabbed me in the chest with the scissors. I felt the stab, and it knocked the wind out of me, but it also woke me up. I woke up as I was in mid-gasp. I'd never forgotten this dream, even though it's been several years since I had it, and it's still the most vivid dream I've ever had. It literally felt like I was dying. That's interesting. So I'm curious to know more about the woman, like whether or not you know her. In her 30s with black hair, like you do have a detailed enough description that perhaps you could pin that description on someone you know in real life. But we can look at being attacked, which is the third from the bottom, and that can indicate that you feel out of control or vulnerable in some aspect of your life. The weapon used and the identity of the attacker may be clues as to what you feel vulnerable about. So that's partly why I want to know who it might be, and maybe that's not something that you can identify, but scissors. That's kind of interesting. And what's also interesting is there was like a fake scissors that you grabbed onto, and then it's like, surprise, there's a second scissors. I don't know what that could represent. I mean, maybe like kindergarten or something. Kindergarten teacher. Don't run with scissors. Or it could just be, because you're in your house too, it could just be a fear of like your own house, like home accidents. I don't know if you're an anxious person in general, but you know, it could be like a home accident type thing. It does have almost a supernatural element to it as well, but I can't really like pin my, finger on what that precisely might be. So again, like some general feeling of vulnerability in your life. And you protected your friend, which was nice. I don't really think that I can analyze that though any deeper. Sorry, but yeah, great nightmare. In my chat. Yes, they opened up 3 clinics in my region dedicated just to treating long haulers. I guess that's referring to people with COVID. Whoops. This is a post by a user named Alex Pickle. The post is titled, "Short but Awful." The post reads, "So it started out fine. I was at school. I think it was the same day, but about half an hour in dream time was passing. I had no schedule or map, so I was walking around near the entrance. Then I hear a huge bang on this metal door. I think it was. I turn, but not even English, to see where the sound came from. I see random boys and girls about to scream with wide eyes, to be interrupted by a teacher or something, shouting, get down now." I see others dropping down, so I followed suit. I was laying on my knees with my hands on my head and neck. Then I feel like it was only about 4 or 5 feet away from me. The only thing I could think it would be is a gun cocking. I could feel my heart beating at my ribs. I blink, then I wake up face down in my pillow with my hands on my head, shaking with my heart beating out of my chest. I had dreamed about a school shooting. Yeah, that's pretty scary. I mean, that one kind of interprets itself, so I might just jump into another. This is a post by a user named Scary Dreams I Had, aptly named. The post is titled, "Does anyone else remember a nightmare too well?" The post reads, "Hello, I'm about to tell you about a nightmare. I always knew I was dreaming, but it felt like I was in the realm I couldn't control, so a lucid nightmare." I'm saying that, he didn't say that. "I was walking home. The weather was sunny, but there were lots of rain puddles. While walking, my feet felt like heavy blocks. I could walk, but it just felt like there was a lot of weight on my feet in front of me. There were these 2 girls, and one was about 7, the other was 11, coming home from the same school as me. I crossed their house and automatically went back to where I turned around and looked at their dad. He's a tall man. He doesn't talk, and he has a slick back ponytail. This whole time the guy is just standing there with his hands behind 2 children's backs. The girls look completely terrified of him, one of them even crying. I go to his backyard. He has a lot of things about witchcraft. This whole time the guy is giving me a creepy vibe, and I go back and ask him, may I write some things down in his backyard? And he shakes his head while smiling creepily. I place one of the drawings next to an African spirit table, and they had a Hispanic cultural tree with a skeleton in a black robe on it. I go back to the many smiling creepily at him. He shows me some of his weird drawings too. Still, while not saying anything, some of his art was exactly from my school. He puts his hands behind my back and is squeezing it. I got so scared that I decided to wake up. Now I'm woke. I questioned the sharp pain in my back. It's in the same spot he was squeezing. Well, never underestimate the power of psychosomatic stuff. Yeah, so I mean, the first part, that's a lucid nightmare. So you have enough awareness to identify that you're dreaming, but your subconscious is too powerful for your conscious mind. So you don't have, it seems like you do have enough control at least to wake up from your lucid nightmare. But within the actual context of the nightmare, you don't seem to have control. Or maybe you just wanted to let it play out. Like maybe you're just curious to see what happened. I've never had the ability to have like a full-on lucid dream or nightmare, but I actually have had nightmares where I've suddenly kind of become aware that it's a nightmare, and I know that I'm asleep, and I feel myself like about to wake up, and it's like, no, stay asleep. Let's see what happens here. So maybe it could be something of that nature. It sounds like you personally know a lot about witchcraft stuff and African spirit tables, which is not something I'm familiar with. So maybe this is something you're just intrigued by in general, and you kind of, maybe this is your unconscious or the dark side of your unconscious wanting to explore whatever you think might be there in that topic of witchcraft, for example. And this guy, maybe with the ponytail, maybe he represents your unconscious. No offense, but like maybe you're curious to see what he's up to. And again, the sharp pain in the back, one of two things is happening, right? Like either your brain is causing a pain because it fits the nightmare, which is probably less likely than maybe you slept on it weird and that pain in your back then manifested in the dream as the guy in the dream pinching it or squeezing it or however you said it. So that's probably more likely to be how that occurred. But it is freaky, especially when it's lucid, because it feels like, you know, maybe this is a real entity that's astrally projecting into my brain. And, you know, if I had stayed, you know, awake for another second, I would have ended up with a broken back or something of that nature. Like, I can understand that. Maybe one or two more, probably just one more, and then we will check out a nightmare from a viewer. Oops. This is a post by a user named Sharing Space. The post is titled, "I just had this really vivid dream." The post reads, "I woke up from this and now I can't sleep. I dreamt that my mother, brother, and I were homeless and living in her car. It was really cramped and I constantly worried about being able to move back in. For whatever reason then, we moved into a tunnel to a playground. At daytime, we would act as if we were a happy family there and play and run around. I was younger in this dream. I remember the tunnel and being really wet and always dark." Sorry, this is me failing to read. It's not him. "On one instance, my mother and I had to wash my hair in the tunnel water. Next thing I know is we drove the car. My mother still had another country's coast." Okay, that is what it says. "I think it was France. There we half accidentally killed somebody. I'm a bit fuzzy on the details concerning this. I think we encountered somebody at night, and at first we were scared of him, but then the situation escalated and we attacked him. I remember bashing their skull in with an iron bar. They still made noises while I did this. We then drove away and tried to get away while it was still night, but we didn't have any gas left and we didn't have any money. So we had to go around at night with a tube through which we stole gas. Once we had enough gas, it was morning and getting light out. The police had found the body, and all over town there were police blockades to stop people from getting out of the town. We had to drive around for a while, but we managed to bypass these barriers and drive back into the tunnel. It was there that my adrenaline wore off and I started to worry constantly about the police finding out. I got so bad I considered to turn myself in. This is when I woke up. I just couldn't take the emotional turmoil." Well, this is a very easy one to interpret. So, being the aggressor, fourth from the bottom, indicates that you have feelings of guilt or that you're afraid about getting caught with something you're hiding. So, I mean, that's directly what's happening here. You even admit to the feeling of guilt and the fear of being caught with something you're hiding. Now, I'm not saying that you and your mother murdered a man in real life, although you could have done, but it does seem like your mother is involved in it, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I've ever seen one quite like that before. So it could be that you and your mother have some secret that maybe you're keeping from someone else. Maybe it could be your brother, maybe it could be your father, and you feel guilty for knowing that thing, or maybe you did something, I don't know, something that you and your mother are both in on that you feel guilty about. I would look into that in real life. I think that could be interesting. An interesting place for you to explore on your own time. I really would like to read this last one. Would I, though? Nah, let's just read. Oh. Okay. No, I thought I had an email with a nightmare, but I don't. But I do have an email with a nightmare from our friend Michelle. That is not a COVID-related nightmare. So let's read that. Here's another nightmare of mine. It was a perfect horror story, and it was weird to be part of it. I called it "The Man Whose Brain Got Scooped Out." Warning, it's a bit gory. Nothing that we shy away from here on the Forgotten Grove. In this dream, I wasn't myself. Well, sometimes I was. Just walking next to him, following him in this weird story. I was a guy, around 40 years old, very short hair, quite plain looking. He was walking on the sidewalk when a car pulled over and a few guys jumped out and grabbed him. By him, you mean you, I think. She means you. But she is him in the dream. Sorry, I'm making this more complicated than it needs to be. In the next part, he was in a surgery chair thingy and 2 doctors were with him. In this part, I was standing next to him, really happy about that. Because the next part wasn't pretty, right? So she's happy not to be him anymore. The doctors were cutting open his skull. The skin was already gone. Without anesthetic for some reason. The guy was screaming from the pain all this time. Then it got worse. They literally took a spoon and scooped out parts of his brain like it was pudding. I turned my eyes away from him because I was disgusted by it. In the next part, the guy was standing in front of a mirror. First, I was standing next to him, but soon I became him again. Or saw things from his point of view, anyway. He had a bandage around his head, but the rest of his head seemed normal. He then hesitantly lifted the bandage from his head, and I tried to imagine what would be left after having your brain removed, but for some reason I couldn't. When he lifted it, it was less horrific than I expected. Excuse me. The skin was gone. There was only his skull. He touched it, and it felt sticky, but he didn't feel pain there anymore, which makes sense, I guess. In the last part, he was walking around, and I was watching him. He was happy and could walk and stuff, so his brain was healthy enough for him to do stuff like that. He was relieved about that. He looked out the window and saw people walking on a beach. He felt a moment of relief, because he believed he had been left on an island in a foreign country, and would at least be left alone. He soon noticed, however, that people weren't responding to him, and the view slowly faded. A nurse came into the hallway and put his hands carefully behind his back while telling him what he already knew. It was just a fake. He was more annoyed than scared, with a sigh, whether they still not done with him, because the nurse calmly replied that they were not indeed. Then the dream ended. So this theme of being someone, seeing things from their perspective and looking from afar, kind of taking turns in a dream, has happened to me quite often. I guess it's kind of like watching a movie. Sometimes you get caught up in the story and you feel like it's actually happening to you, yet you somehow know, to some extent, that it isn't you. I hope you enjoyed these nightmares, etc. That is very interesting. I've never had a nightmare like that, where I guess I've had nightmares where my identity isn't, like, it doesn't feel like I'm myself, but I'm not really aware of who I am. I've had a lot of nightmares like that, but I've definitely never had one that's like that cinematic, I suppose, where I'm looking from all of the different characters' perspectives. That's really interesting. In terms of what it could mean, I mean, the fact that you aren't him makes me think it's not about you, but maybe you have empathy for a friend who's going through surgery or like a tough time like that. You feel for a friend or a parent if he's 40 years old, who might be going through like a medical issue or something of that nature. But that's all I have for that. Now, before we go, we need to make sure that we look at this results of the poll. So let me share my screen in a second. See it? There it is. So I have not had a nightmare related to COVID is the most answered with 2 votes. I've had a quarantine related to being trapped. That's me. And I've also had more nightmares since this all began. So that's me. So looks like 3 people answered the poll. And I'm the only one apparently who's had COVID dreams. Although of course Michelle has as well, but I guess she's not watching live. That's fine. We don't have a lot of audience, so we don't always have to nail it in every case. But there it is. So that's gonna do it for this week. Let me see. Next week we're going to be talking about hypnosis and nightmares. So I thought that would be an interesting topic. I'll be talking about hypnosis as a cure for nightmares, as it's often described, and also the extent to which it's tapping into something kind of spooky in the brain, just like in general. You didn't see the poll. Oh, it's pinned at the top. That's all right. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, so that's it for this week. So give me a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the stream, and to not miss my Thursday videos and next week's stream when we discuss hypnosis and nightmares. What else? I think that's about it. So again, thanks for stopping by. I'm Sandor Desmond with the Forgotten Grove, and until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.